I can put in the workouts and do them exactly how I am supposed to, and I can take my creatine 30 minutes after, and I can take my BCAAs, and I can do this and I can do that. But if I'm not getting good quality sleep, my body's not making those physiological adaptations, and I'm just going to burn myself out and get injured. So those three things, and then adding in strength and mobility. Easy as pie, right?
Welcome to ART,
the Adventure Race Training Podcast.
I'm Nick Hurff.
And I'm Jason Magnus.
And with years of coaching experience and formal education in human performance, we've helped numerous athletes to achieve their goals and increase their self-efficacy. My background comes from formal graduate-level education, coaching a variety of collegiate teams and professional endurance athletes. My athletes range from everyday racers to NCAA All-Americans and multiple world record holders.
And I'm the captain of Team Bend Racing. I've devoted the past 2.5 decades of my life to adventure racing, competing at the top level for over a decade. But I draw a lot of my coaching and training philosophy on my years as a top-level climbing, acrobatics, and highlining coach, essentially trying to minimize the learning curve on notoriously difficult sports. I've also coached a few world champions, so together, Nick and I have some great successes.
Ultimately, we're here to share our knowledge and expertise with the community to help you prepare for your next big race. Our goal is that these conversations provide valuable insights to elevate your adventure.
All right, let's get started.
Welcome to the show. Our guest today is Dr. Rachel Popelka, a physical therapist, endurance coach, and lifelong adventurer who helps runners and adventure racers stay strong, recover from injuries, and push their limits without burning out. With over 7 years of experience as a physical therapist and a personal journey from struggling to run a single mile to completing ultramarathons and multi-day expedition races, Rachel blends science-backed rehab with real-world endurance training. Her passion is guiding athletes to not only come back from injury, but return stronger, more resilient, and ready for big adventures. What I love about this conversation is the passion we shared together for working with athletes. As a side note, some of the audio is not the best on this episode. However, there's so many nuggets of good information packed in here, you want to listen to the entire recording. So with that said, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hey Rachel, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. So you're a physical therapist, you adventure race, you ultra run, you coach a bunch of people. You want to give us kind of an overview of kind of who you are as a professional, and then we'll probably dive into more of who you are kind of personally.
Yeah, so professionally, I started as an athletic trainer. That's what my undergrad degree is in, and I worked as an athletic trainer while I was pursuing my doctorate of physical therapy. And then went on to get my doctorate of physical therapy, and I've been working as a travel physical therapy ever since I graduated back in 2018. So I've just been traveling around the country working in all types of healthcare settings as a PT, but I keep being drawn back to the outpatient ortho and sports med.
That's fantastic. And for those who aren't familiar with athletic trainers typically work in collegiate level settings in high schools. And they're kind of like a mix between, I'd say, a physical therapist and an EMT. It's kind of how I would describe it. But they're more on the medical field, not really as much like a strength conditioning coach or a personal trainer. So the name can sometimes throw people off. Do you want to kind of describe what the training background is?
Yeah, you did a great job explaining that. I like that, the mix between PT and EMT. Because I always explain, like, we do emergency medicine on sidelines of sporting events typically. So anytime if you're watching a professional football game and someone goes down on the field, right before they cut to commercial, you see a team of people running out. That's usually the athletic trainers. So we are trained to save lives and kind of stabilize you until you can get to the hospital. And our main job when we're on the sideline is really putting you into kind of three camps of, are you being a baby? Here's some tape, get back out there. Are you seriously injured, but it's not something that needs to go to the hospital right now, like maybe a torn ACL, but you need to sit on the sideline until the game is over and we can get you into ortho. Or are you going into cardiac arrest and I need to save your life and get you in the ambulance and to the hospital? So usually you fall into one of those three camps, and my job is to decide which camp you're in and what the best treatment is for you.
And that's perfect. And so to go from kind of athletic training or working with more directly with the sports, with the athletes one-on-one, but more in closer with the teams and on the field, what was your reason for transitioning into physical therapy?
Yeah, when I became an athletic trainer, I actually wasn't into sports. I didn't really play sports growing up as a kid. I did a lot of stuff outdoors with my family. So I like to cross country ski and bike and camp and all of that. But I didn't really ever get into organized sports, which I was the only athletic trainer that didn't have a favorite sports team. And people were like, why are you an AT? But I really liked the athlete mindset. And that was similar to my mindset growing up in a family of farmers of work hard, see results. And so I really enjoyed being around people that were goal oriented and were working towards something and actually wanted to do hard work because they thought it was fun. So then when I got into athletic training, I really enjoyed it. I knew I wanted to go on for further education. At the time, you only needed a bachelor's degree. Now you need a master's degree to be an athletic trainer. So I knew I wanted to go on for my master's or my doctorate. The question was just in what? And physical therapy really just gave me more tools in my toolbox to be able to help a bigger group of people. So I just wanted to really answer the question for myself of, are athletes who I really am, who I want to work with? Is that really my purpose? Or do I want to work with people with spinal cord injuries or in the hospital or home health? I had just never experienced any of those settings, so I wanted to try them. Turns out it was an expensive full circle where I came back to, yes, athletes are my passion, but it was so good. And I feel like I've gleaned a lot from working with other populations as well that I can apply to athletes.
That's fantastic. And I've worked with DPT programs. I've taught in the Masters of Athletic Training department for a bit, so I'm familiar. To me, the level of expertise and the level of detail and depth that the physical therapists go into through their doctorate programs is pretty significant. Would you say that that's fair to say?
For a typical program, you have 3 years, 2 years of more of your didactic or in classroom training, and then 1 year of clinicals. Different programs will organize those in different ways. And so I would say for physical therapy, you really get a lot of breath. So we get your doctorate level kinesiology. We're dissecting cadavers. We're diving into your exercise phys at a doctorate level. But we're also learning outpatient ortho, again, working with spinal cords, working with kids. There's so many different things that you can do with physical therapy. So when we're graduating, we really have just kind of touched the surface of each different discipline. And then once you graduate, you take that base knowledge and then you really develop down whichever rabbit hole you decide to go into and to specialize in.
And then the athletic training side, I mean, you had a background of working and years of learning and working on rehabbing athletes. And so doing that, coming into the physical therapy and now going back into kind of full circle, working with endurance athletes, adventure racers, you have 7 years of formal education in that and then years of experience professionally. So what are some of the insights with your background that you're able to provide to people?
Yeah, the cool thing, I guess, about me is that I really personally wasn't athletic. So, and then I now, I just had my first 100-mile attempt. I've finished multiple expedition races. I still don't, I guess, identify as an athletic person, but compared to the normal 33-year-old, I am very athletic in all of the things that I do. But I understand what it's like to travel through the continuum of someone who literally can't even run a mile to someone who can complete and be mid-pack at an expedition adventure race level. So being able to see that personally and then also professionally, I've worked anywhere from Pee-wee soccer up to professional ballet and USA gymnastics. And then As a PT, I've worked with people literally on their deathbed, and my job is to make them comfortable in their dying process, to athletes and kids in college, high school, to grandma just wanting to get back to doing her 2-mile walks a day, right? And like anywhere in between. So it's given me a really good insight on what life looks like for a person who makes different health choices along the way. And it's really solidified what I want to be like when I'm in my 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And what I do now is going to determine that. And so, just the importance, especially for women, of weight training for our healthy bones and our independence and our cardio training. And then also just finding fun and community in whatever it is that you enjoy doing. In my case, it's the ultra endurance world.
That's phenomenal and great advice. And that's the same thing, like as you age, there's a reduction in lean body mass, right? So lean muscle essentially as you age. And research is showing, obviously weight training significantly increases the strength and maintaining it. And then another thing, I think it was UMMC in Maryland was doing research in one of their expertise areas, and they were finding that leucine thresholds end up increasing as you age, meaning that you need to eat more and more protein at the same level of effect as you get older. And so it's neat to see kind of holistically how that works. Our DPT program, when I was at Alvernia, they brought in a guest speaker every year who was a physical therapist specialized in geriatric weight training. So he would get tons of his elderly population weight training. And I mean, he had multiple people that were in their 80s, 90s, deadlifting like stupid amounts of weight and squatting. And it was just phenomenal to see that if you use it, you're not going to lose it as much, which is pretty neat.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite populations to work with is like older women. And I found I tend to pick rural areas to work in because I like playing in mountains. And so a lot of the women that I would work with were women who, had lost their husbands, all their children had moved to the big city, and they just wanted to stay in their home. And they're like, but I have to chop firewood and like I have to take care of all of these things. And, everyone is saying I should move to the city, I should move into a home. And I'm like, why? And they're like, well, because I'm, 60, because I'm 70. And I'm like, that doesn't matter. Like, if we do these things, you can maintain your strength or gain more strength than you have now. And there's no reason for you not to be independent. And so it's just really cool to be a bad influence on these women and just see that sparkle come back into their eyes of like, no, you're right. I can do things. Like, I still have value. I can still provide value. Like, yeah, I might hire out some things or it might take me longer, but I can be self-sufficient. And it's just really, really cool to see people kind of come into their own that way.
I love that. And that's the rewarding aspect of coaching is to me, I've always called it helping people increase their self-efficacy. So there's that light bulb that goes off when they realize that they are capable or they're stronger than they thought, or they get that self-confidence and that ability that they can, right? There's a variety of athletes I always would see it with. For me, I would say the number one demographic that I worked with where I would see that the most frequently would be with freshman female NCAA athletes. So they come in the fall and I'm working with the team. They come in, and this is more spring and winter sport athletes. So the fall sports, they're already integrated with their teams and they've been through preseason and all that. The other ones, when they come in, though, they're in a new environment, people they don't know. They're the young kids. They're in classes. They're kind of feeling out who they are. And not all of them, but a big, large majority of them are having, some self-confidence things going on or just kind of being in this new environment. And so in the weight room, taking them through several weeks of training and all of a sudden they're squatting more, they're deadlifting more. Some of them are doing cleans. They've never done it. They start to get stronger. And while that's going on, they're also starting to fit in with their team. They're starting to fit in with the classes. And there's this moment where they just change, right? And their personality comes out and they fit in. And there was a time where, a bunch of the freshman girls on one of the, I think it was softball, walk out of the weight room. I come back in, they'd finished their workout, like cleaned up or whatever. So they're waiting for me. I walk in the hallway for something, come back in, and they're just flexing in the mirror, taking photos. And I was like,
Yeah.
that's awesome. Like that was a cultural shift, which is pretty cool. So yeah, I love that moment when you help people to see what they are and what they're capable of.
Yeah. And I mean, that's really what endurance sports are all about when it boils down to it, right? It's the vehicle that we choose, whether it's because we're naturally more adept towards endurance sports or we have some trauma that forced us down that road or whatever our reason is for picking that. But it really is our vehicle to be able to show ourselves that we're worth putting in a lot of freaking effort for a big goal. And so it's just cool to see how that manifests differently in different people.
Exactly. Yeah. Somebody once told me, they're like, you did what? Like, who hurt you?
You can't hurt me worse than I can hurt myself.
I'm in control. So, with that said, how did you transition into endurance sports?
Slid down the trauma route. So I, in high school, so I grew up going to the gym and lifting weights. Like I was like that. Arnold Schwarzenegger was one of my heroes, right? And I'm like in the gym doing rows and like flexing in the mirror because that's what my brother and my dad were doing. And so I didn't do a lot of cardio except for kind of fun stuff like we'd go cross country skiing and stuff like that. And then my friend, my freshman year of high school, I went from a tiny school of 12 people to a big school of 400 in my class for high school. And my friend was like, you should join the cross country team. There's all these hot guys with their shirts off. And I'm like, well, how hard can running be? So I sign up and it turns out it's really hard. And I was not good at it at all. I cried and I finished second to last every single race. But it was the first experience that I had where the other team's parents were cheering for me and everyone was just happy and positive that you were out there doing your best. And it was just a huge shift from when I had played like basketball and volleyball and parents are arguing on the sidelines and like there's all of this, you hate the other team and yada yada. And so it was just a really interesting culture that I enjoyed, but I hated the running. So I put running aside. I would train for a 5K like once a year and then never run again. And then finally, after I graduated PT school, I had become chronically ill. So I was in a lot of pain all the way through undergrad and PT school, couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. I said I couldn't even run a mile, and like walking to class was a big deal. And 13 days before I was supposed to get married, I found out my fiance had been cheating on me for years. Yeah, so that was the catalyst that, like, I remember making the choice of I can either use this as an excuse and downward spiral, or I can use this as an excuse and make it the best damn thing that's ever happened to me. And that's the choice that I chose. And so I had changed my diet at that point and started to feel better and just started hiking. We have a ski hill in my hometown in Wisconsin, and I just started hiking up and down it every day. And then pretty soon I started running out of daylight. So I was like, I should get into running. I want to be the type of person that can run a 5K without having to train for it. Like that was my long-term goal. And so I just ran every day and worked up to a 5K and then started traveling as a PT, met some other runners, and it just quickly went from, well, if I can do 3 miles, I could do 6. And then, well, if I'm doing 6, that's 12 and another mile is a half marathon. And then, well, if I can do a half marathon, I should do a marathon. And then accidentally did a 50K instead. And it just kind of kept spiraling. And so, yeah, I went from a mile to a marathon or a 50K in about a year and a half, and then just have kept at it. It just gets addicting after a while.
How long ago was that you did that year where you did the big jump?
I put my running shoes on for the final kind of push. In June of 2018 was when I went for my first run. I just went out to see how far I could go, and it was a mile. And it was tough. It was slow. I think it was took me 13, 14 minutes was the longest that I could run without stopping. I tasted blood in the back of my throat. Like it was a VO2 max effort. But yeah, and then it just kept it didn't get easier, but I was able to go longer, and that's still how it is, right? It's never easy. You're always pushing yourself, but you're able to do more at the same capacity.
I love it. And so you've been at this for a while, which is fantastic. And so Kind of shaping it all together then. So you come from this background of self-developing into the ultra endurance world and seeing you have a rich history of formal education and experience with working with athletes from a medical injury kind of rehabilitation, return to play. Do you want to kind of talk through how you shape and frame things for, different athletes that you work with in the endurance community?
I've melded together kind of the athletic training model, the PT model, and the endurance coach model, and I've melded them all together because what I didn't like about traditional in clinic PT is it really puts me in a silo where I'm not able to guide a client as well with everything outside of just here are your specific PT exercises. And it doesn't work very well when you're not looking at an athlete as a whole person and really helping them develop all of their systems of recovery and their training.
What causes those constraints?
Insurance.
Okay, so they're
Yeah.
only willing to cover certain aspects.
So different insurances have different rules. For the most part, if you come in and you say, oh, I sprained my ankle, I have to make sure that all of my goals are written around your ankle. So then if you come in and you're like, oh, well, now I'm having neck pain, like even though it might be because you've altered your gait and you're doing these weird things and it is kind of because of your ankle, some insurances will be like, no, you can't talk to them or touch their neck or do anything. It has to just be the ankle. And like, okay, we can justify hip strengthening and maybe core strengthening because we can see how that attaches. So there's a big
Mhm.
gray area that you can play in, and kind of play the game for the benefit of the athlete. But insurance really dictates like how long we're able to see an athlete. And that's the other thing too, is basically once you're not having pain with your daily life, insurance is usually like, great, get them out the door. And it just takes, if you're taking someone who is in so much pain that they're not able to really walk very well, they're not training, and then yeah, we get them to where they're pain free in their daily life, and now I'm trying to get them to run 100 miles. That's a big continuum that they still have to travel through from, yeah, I can make it through my workday to I can be a successful athlete. And that's where you really miss with insurance. They're not going to let you hang out for 6 months to see an athlete for as long as it takes to bring them through that full continuum.
That makes a lot of sense. So then for you, you charge a lot of just direct pay and get to do anything you need and want with the athletes you work with. So what would you say is the typical athlete that you work with and concerns that they may have, common things you see, those type of stuff?
Yeah, so I've got a good array of people that I see, but they all are endurance athletes of some sort. So like have some young people down to 16 that have, just had surgery and they're returning to mountain biking. I'm really excited about that one. And then I have some people that are like that older women who are in their 50s and 60s and wanting to get into weight training to supplement their running, and not sure how to correctly go about doing that without aggravating, XYZ history of injury that they have, but knowing that it's really important. And then I've got quite a few people that were, runners in the past or adventure racers in the past, have kind of taken a break and are trying to get back into it and want to do it smarter this time and take their time and incorporate all of the injury prevention side of things. So the weight training, the mobility training, making sure that they're thinking about their diet and their stress management and their sleep, and all of those things as they're building back in, just knowing that they're older than they were last time that they were doing ultras and they want to be doing them as long as they possibly can.
That's fantastic. So there's a couple things I want to hit off of that. I want to hit something about how you integrate strength training for ultra endurance athletes and really adventure racers, I think we'll target down on. And then, I think we can then deep dive into mobility a bit. We can also talk about overuse injuries and why for endurance athletes and AR, that's kind of a thing. For strength, how would you recommend for people listening in who are, let's say they're adventure racers, they're training 3 to 5 times a week, doing a variety, mostly biking and running is what most of them do. How would you recommend them examining strength training and maybe some actual things they can integrate?
So the big thing is to start slow. Don't add volume for the sake of adding volume. When it comes to strength training, you want to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And that's the nuance of strength training is like you can take one exercise, so let's say squats, and you can make 100 different variations to a squat and have it do 100 different things. So for endurance athletes specifically, I don't train endurance with strength training because you're not going to give any amount of stimulus that's going to match your hundreds of thousands of footfalls in a long run with your 3 to 4 sets of 15 to 20 lunges, right? Like it's just not gonna match up, and you're just adding volume to add volume, which is going to increase your risk of injury. So we want a different stimulus with strength training for endurance athletes. So typically we want to go heavier, getting around that 70% 1 rep max. What that means functionally to people, you don't need to go out and actually test your 1 rep max, but you know you are kind of in the zone if you're doing usually 3 sets of 8, and the last 2 sets of 8 for each, or 2 reps of 8 for each set are difficult to get off, where you're basically almost failing, but still able to keep good form. So again, you don't want to sacrifice form for just throwing heavy weight around because that's a disaster for injury. So keeping good form, but basically just at that failure level, and that'll put you around that 70% range. Good enough for what we're trying to do, right? We're training Olympic athletes or Olympic lifters. So for your endurance athlete, if you're doing 3 sets of 8, last 2 are very hard to get off, you should be around that 70% 1 rep max. The good news with that too, for especially women, is that's what the research is suggesting is what we need for stimulus to maintain or even improve our bone density. And that is very important, especially starting at age 30 and up. So you get to kill 2 birds with 1 stone as a female athlete there. And then the other thing is, so I would start with a low amount of lifts but getting full body. So typically I'll split it into like 1 heavy day for lower, and I'm going to pick like maybe 2 compound lifts and 3 more muscle specific lifts. So I'm never giving someone really more than 5 lifts in a day. And then I'll do usually a day that's more of your traditional PT type exercises, where it's more of your accessory work. We're working on your stabilizers, your smaller muscles. And then I'll do the same thing for upper body. So I'll do a heavy upper body day where we're pushing, we're pulling in all of our planes of motion. And then I'll do an accessory day where I'm working specifically on rotator cuff, periscapular muscles, different things like that. So where you're kind of mixing prehab and heavy lifting. And some people will put that into 4 different sessions. That's personally how I like to do it. Some people will do, okay, I'm going to take all those 3 things and I'm just going to go to the gym 1 day a week and get that done. And that works for me. Some people will do like, well, I'm going to do all my upper body, heavy lifting and then my accessory at the end and then my lower body and only go to the gym twice a week. You can split it a bunch of different ways, but I would get at least one of each of those categories in. And going for quality over quantity.
Love it. And for those listening, so 2 of the terms, one is volume. So volume is more or less the number of reps you're doing. So volume, you can really calculate it out if you're looking at volume load there's several different methods to do it, but let's just say you do 3 sets of 10 reps. That's 30 reps. And if you do that at 100 pounds, you're looking at, what is that? 3,000 pounds of volume load. And then Rachel's giving me a nod that I'm doing the math right, which is great.
Blindly nodding, by the way. I did not mentally check your math.
3,000 or 30,000. And so that's volume load. Now, another method you can do is that you do the same thing and then you also layer in time. So if you were to do the same weight and the same number of reps, but you take 10 seconds per rep, that's going to be way more volume than if you were to do 2 seconds per rep, right? the general theme is that you're doing way more work. Whereas intensity is a term you'll hear, and intensity is just the weight. So the higher the weight or the resistance, the more intense it is. Just like if you're going to sprint, run, jogging is going to be less intense than sprinting. Deadlifting 500 pounds is way more intense than deadlifting 50 pounds. And so there's a inverse relationship between them. The lighter the weight, the more volume or number of reps you can do. And then the heavier the weight, the less number of reps you can do, essentially. And so what Rachel's saying is that because we're training at such a high volume by running over and over those thousands of steps, we're looking at ensuring that when we're weightlifting, we're not doing so many reps and sets that we're adding tons of more volume on and potentially getting injured. We're looking at instead building pure strength and trying to go at heavier weights for less reps. Does that sound right?
Yeah,
And
yeah, 100%.
yeah, and then another aspect with that is she mentions that 70% mark. So that 70%, between 70 and 75% of one rep max is where you get a testosterone response, typically in weightlifting. And so by doing that, it's an anabolic hormone, which helps to grow muscle and repair tissue and kind of put those out. It's usually a mix of, testosterone's one, growth factor, and IGF-1 or others that are kind of stimulated under different conditions. So by hitting those, that's usually a good sign of increasing strength. And then a lot of strength is neurological. So by doing the heavier weight, you're recruiting more muscle fibers through the nervous system, and you're building that nervous system out too to be stronger and a little more explosive. And so really your method, Rachel, sounds like it's targeting pure strength because it is what's lacking in the typical endurance training. Does that sound right?
Exactly. Volume is kind of the problem of endurance training, is how can we get good at volume without putting in so much volume that we're injuring ourselves with the volume? And so when it comes to everything else that we're doing, our mobility work and our strength work, we want to complement what we're doing, and you don't complement by copying, right? You complement by doing something opposite that's complementary. So we want to target those type 2 muscle fibers, so our strength and our power muscle fibers, because we're already getting our training through our run training for our endurance and our type 1 muscle fibers. We don't need to add more training to our type 1. Like it's too much. It's too much. So we want to focus on strength, focus on type 2, focus on power, all of the things that we're not getting with our run workouts.
Can you explain the difference between type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers?
So there's a lot of nerdy science that goes into it, and I'm not going to break it down into the different types of type 2. But for the general person, what you need to know is type 1 and type 2. We have our muscles are made up of a different percentage of type 1 and type 2, and different muscles, depending upon what their main use is, will have a different percentage of type 1 versus type 2. Type 1 muscle fibers are generally used more for your endurance, and that comes based off of, at a cellular level, how they're getting their fuel. Type 2 muscle fibers are going to be used more for your power and your strength. So where this comes in for an athlete, type 1 muscle fibers are what you're going to be using mostly when you're on the bike for a long time, when you're running, when you're paddling for a long time. Your type 2 muscle fibers are going to be what you're using when you're sprinting, right, to get up that loop of a switchback, when you're trying to go up over a route in a trail, when you're whitewater rafting and you need to attack the top of each wave, right? That's going to be more of your power type 2 muscle fibers versus then you're going to go back to using more of your 1 when you're just kind of in that zone 2, zone 3 steady state. And again, it's not like black and white. It's not like a switch that we're flipping. It's way more complicated than that, but that gives you enough to know to kind of structure different things around.
Very well said. And as you train, your muscle fibers will start to shift a little more towards what you're training. So if you're going to train more endurance based, your fibers, think of it as a spectrum, are going to start to shift more towards that type 1. And if you start to train more strength, they're going to shift more towards the type 2. And there's ways you can kind of train both. And until you get to very high levels, or a lot of training in those, they aren't going to quite cancel each other out, but they will a little bit as far as, eventually you hit diminishing returns. So, but for most people, getting it in is going to be terrific for both of those. Yeah. And then another thing that you had mentioned, Rachel, were compound lifts. So compound lifts are multi-joint lifts. So if I do a bicep curl, for example, I'm only really moving my elbow joint. That's not a compound movement. But if I am bench pressing, I'm under higher load, I'm moving both my shoulders and my elbow. And then same thing with like deadlifts, squats, cleans. On those, I'm really using multiple joints in order to move it. And when we're using multiple joints, we're doing a lot more muscles, and we're getting a lot more of a hormonal response to it and a lot more load under. But generally, it's just the number of joints. So for squats, ankle, knee, hips are the main ones that are moving, and we're moving a lot more weight with it. And with compound lifts, when you're time crunched, you're typically going to get 70%, 80% of what let's call them gains are, and the stress that you're imposing from those compound lifts. Those are the priority and the most important. And then your non-compound movements are more just like supplementary, right? They're auxiliary that kind of come in and just complement everything you're doing. They can also be used a lot for injury prevention, balancing things out. They're not really the focus. They're not where you're going to get your so-called gains from, but they are important and have their role. Yeah. What would you say for injury prevention? How would you include that in, and where do you kind of structure that in? Because I think that kind of leads into it.
Yeah, injury prevention with endurance sports, I kind of alluded to it, is we have a volume problem, right? That's the big problem of coaches and athletes of the more volume that you put down, the higher your risk of injury, right? So if we're gambling and we have a roulette table, essentially what we're trying to do is color in some of the reds blacks. So we have a higher chance of landing on black and not getting injured than we do on red and getting injured. There's never going to be 100% guarantee that we're not going to get injured, but we can modify the statistics of getting injured by what we do or don't do. So the biggest thing to reduce injury risk for any endurance athlete is going to be know why you're training and what the purpose of every single workout that you're doing is, and make sure that your body is feeling like that's the benefit that you're getting. So if you're just going out to get volume for volume's sake and you're not specifically in a base right time of your training, then you're just putting in miles that are going to increase your injury risk. Now, if you need to build your base, then that's a different story. But again, you don't want to be building base at your VO2 max. So thinking about like, is this run truly a recovery run? Is this ride working on my power going up hills? Is this paddle more for technicality? Am I working on my endurance with paddling? But like knowing exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it and making sure that that makes sense so that you're getting the most out of the least that you can do. Because ideally we want to, and for our time and sanity, be able to do the least amount and get the most benefit out of it. So I would say just knowing why you're doing what you're doing is going to be huge. And then sleep, nutrition is going to be the next two things. So if you're not fueling your body, you're just breaking it down and you're not giving it the bricks to build itself back up. It would be like hiring someone to build you a house, but only paying for 50% of the supplies and then being surprised when your house looks like crap. So ensure you're fueling, give your body what it needs. And then sleep is the time when your body is actually making all of the physiological changes. So I like the metaphor of baking a cake, right? So if I'm going to bake a cake, I'm going to mix all of these specific ingredients together in a specific order. Each one is doing a different thing, right? Like I'm going to put 2.5 cups of flour. I'm not going to put 2.5 cups of baking soda, right? Because that's my speed work. I'm going to put a tablespoon of baking soda. So mixing all the things together in the right proportions is really important. But I can put all of the love and time and care into that. If I don't take that cake and put it in the oven for an hour at 350, I'm not going to get a cake. Right. And it's the same thing with sleep. If I can put in the workouts and do them exactly how I am supposed to, and I can take my creatine 30 minutes after, and I can take my BCAAs, and I can do this and I can do that. But if I'm not getting good quality sleep, my body's not making those physiological adaptations, and I'm just going to burn myself out and get injured. So those three things, and then adding in strength and mobility. Easy as pie, right?
That's amazing. I love that analogy. That's phenomenal. There's actually earlier this week, I have an athlete on one of my logs. He's training for a 200 miler. And I analyzed his resting heart rate that he logs every day. And his Garmin will upload his sleep stuff as well, which is pretty neat. He just uploads it over time. And so what I found was I looked at how long he slept and what his resting heart rate was each day. And it obviously had a, I guess a negative correlation. So the more he slept, the lower his resting heart rate, which means he was adapting more, which is really neat because it's a mix of, training days, rest days, all different stimulus. But overall, his body is recovering and more well rested when he sleeps more and better prepared for, training the next day. And then the resting heart rate over time, we're seeing when you look at his resting heart rate, over months, we're seeing a slight downward trend, which is what we want as well, which is pretty neat that while we're going through multiple training blocks, we're actually seeing a decrease in resting heart rate, even though the stress is increased, which is pretty cool. So it's just super neat. Anyway, nerding out on stuff. In general, we add stress and then we want to recover. And the two most important things for recovery are nutrition and sleep.
Percent. Yeah, if you're not eating and you're not sleeping, don't talk to me. It's just, I can give you, and I'll talk to like your normal people in the clinic too. And it's like, I can give you clamshells until I'm blue in the face, but I'm not going to fix anything if you're not giving your body the basics that it needs to heal. It's just, again, I'm just adding volume to add volume, and it's just not going to be helpful. So eat and sleep and train.
I love it. So an overuse injury is kind of what we're really targeting with endurance athletes. And an overuse injury is when we're doing the same movement pattern over and over and over and over again. So if we take an athlete who, let's say they're playing field hockey, soccer, lacrosse, right? They're usually moving in all different planes of motion. They're sprinting, they're jumping, they're kind of moving all around different ways. Whereas you take a marathon runner or just a runner, they're running forward the entire time and they're only running forward and they're just doing the same motion over and over and over and over again. They're way more likely to get injured. And so often we see overuse injuries for running, kind of lower body mostly. If we're looking at volleyball, kind of overhead movement patterns. So, we would see volleyball pitchers, professional paddlers, swimmers are all doing overhead. You see a lot of scapula issues and scapular traction kind of deviation stuff to work with. But in the lens of adventure racing, what would you say are things that people would typically see for overuse injuries?
I've actually gotten a lot of shoulders, and I think it comes from the mountain bike and the paddle, and especially the paddle. A lot of people don't specifically train for paddle, and they're not doing upper body lifting because they're just thinking about their legs as their engine for biking and for running. But even for adventure racing, when we're trekking, we have heavy packs. Like you can't ignore your upper body. Lift your upper body, people. And even with runners, like even my runners, I will force them to lift upper body for injury prevention because it's all about transfer of energy with your arm swing, and there's a lot that goes into it. If you're using trekking poles or not using trekking poles, right, that's going to be a lot of different stress that you're intentionally putting through your upper body to take off of your lower body. But I see a lot of shoulders and Achilles seems to be the Achilles heel, pun intended. And then a lot of like glute stuff going on, which I think is coming more from being weighted and not training weighted on the trek. And then the bike.
Yeah, and I've noticed for, before I would get some IT band issues and glute issues, and I felt like, the glute med piriformis stuff was from uneven terrain. So going through the woods and going over logs and uneven stepping where it needs all that stability really in the hip. And when the stability in the hip isn't there, the strength isn't there, it yields to, issues with IT band, but also issues in the hip with overloading. And again, similar to like you said, the paddle, if they're not training the paddle, they're not strong, they're overloading it. I think similar, at least in my experience, was if my hips are weak because I'm not going sideways or I'm not going off trail enough, I'm just sticking with roads or trails that are straightforward, then I was getting issues there.
That kind of accessory work that I was alluding to earlier is for all my athletes. I make sure that they are working right glute min, glute med, all of those stabilizing muscles. That their job is to stabilize our pelvis when we're standing on one leg or in single leg stance. If it's not, we're getting a lot of laterally or side to side with our pelvis, and that can cause issues at the low back, depending upon if that's your weakest link in the chain, or it can send issues down to the knee or the ankle, again, just depending upon where your weakest link is. So really working on, do you have that stability? And it's interesting because you'll see people that can put down huge amounts of power on the bike. They can run, 50 miles, but they can't stand on one leg for 30 seconds with their eyes closed. And so they just have this huge discrepancy of they can put down a lot of power with their big prime movers, but their accessory muscles just aren't matching that. And so that's where you get the imbalances. And that's where you set yourself up for overuse injuries typically.
Love it. Yeah. And with my athletes, very similar. So we probably have very similar protocols that we do, but a lot of times it's building up those small muscles around the different joints. So for the shoulder, it's rotator cuff work. So the rotator cuff are 4 small muscles that help with fine movement around the shoulder. So they're easy to get overworked if you don't strengthen them because they're small. And then they can also get overloaded if you go into weird positions. Like, if you're going to go do some rock climbing and you have a rock climb, you might get in a weird spot and mess something up. And then for me, a lot of that hip stabilizer work. So a lot of banded side steps. I like the bands because they're fast and easy. You can knock out 2-3 minutes of just a bunch of different banded things, walking sideways, forward, backwards, and all that kind of stuff. And then any kind of ankle stability type work or banded ankles, any of that. What are some protocols that you like or things you'd want to share with people that they could implement?
Yeah, I would say if you're going to do one thing, just add one exercise for injury prevention for your lower body. Now, take this with a grain of salt because it's never just one thing. But if you're like, give me one thing, Rachel, what is it? I would add in the airplane exercise. So it's where you're standing on one leg, you're bent over like you're in an RDL, but then you're rotating the pelvis. So you're internally rotating and then externally rotating, which is really hard to describe this exercise without like just showing you. But you're basically in like a T position and you're rotating your body. And so what that's giving you is you're rotating your pelvis on a closed chain femur through your entire range of motion of internal and external rotation. It's also forcing you to stabilize and balance on that one leg. So you're not only getting glute, which is usually the main reason why you're doing it, but you're also getting stability throughout the entire chain. So it's going to give you that foot supination and pronation. It's going to give you that rotation through the tibia for your knee, right? It's giving you a lot of different things all at once. So that's I give that to every single athlete that I have, and every single athlete complains about it because it's hard for them, which means it's good for them.
I've been that athlete. My PT likes to do that one with me. And yeah. And for those listening, we keep talking about glute med and glute max, I guess, are the two. So glute max is like your butt, right? Glute med is essentially on the outside of your hip and it's smaller, kind of wraps around and it helps to stabilize your hip side to side. So when we're talking about being on one leg, really that's engaging to keep yourself balanced and keep your body weight kind of centered over.
It's a really underlooked muscle group, and there's other deep internal and external rotators of the hip that just don't get worked in your normal daily life, and they don't get worked with our endurance things a lot, like running and biking. You use them, but you're not specifically straining them. And they have so many implications up and down the chain. But not only that, even with like pelvic floor health, and so many different things. So working your hip internal and external rotators is just going to be huge for your overall health, really.
I love that you're just very practical. Like, here's one piece of a thing you can do. And what we can do is we can try to find a video and put it in the show notes so that way people can click on it and see, or if there's a link to you demonstrating it on any social media, we can link that in so people can find out, which would be great. Let me write that down. Link to airplane.
I have one on my YouTube and one on my Instagram. I can send you some links.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll put those in the show notes so people can just click on it. Can you talk us through mobility and how to think about that? What is it, and holistically, why is it important, or is it important?
Yeah. So mobility is going to be another piece of the puzzle. And so if we go back to our cake analogy, that's going to be your vanilla, right? Like, again, you're not going to put 2 cups of vanilla because you'll have shitty cake. But you definitely want to put your tablespoon in there. Otherwise, you're going to have a really bland cake. So at minimum, what's the least that I can do and see results? As an endurance athlete, I would at minimum put in 3 sessions a week of mobility, kind of spaced out throughout the week. So, like, personally, I'll usually do a short session on Tuesday, a session on Thursday, and a session on Saturday. But you can pick whatever days. And I would have those sessions lasting anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes. So it's not a huge amount of time, but you want to think about moving your joints through their entire range of motion nice and easily, right? We're essentially lubricating all of our joints. A lot of our joints get their nutrition and lubrication from movement. So, like, if we look at knees, everyone's talking about how we're going to need to have our knees replaced because we're runners, right? Which is false, by the way. That's been debunked. Don't listen to anybody that tells you that. But one of the reasons why running is actually good for your knees is because the cartilage is like a sponge. So, if you're doing dishes and you have a dirty dish sponge and you want to clean another dish, so you want to clean out your sponge, you have to put that sponge into clean water, squeeze it, and then relax for it to get rid of its waste products and pick up clean water, right? That's how a lot of our joints work. So they need that repetitive movement in order to get rid of their waste products and pick up their nutrition and their lubrication. So that's what mobility is doing for our joints. And then for our muscles and our ligaments, right, they're again just giving us that smooth movement back and forth, allowing our nerves to glide within their sheath that can break up any adhesions along the way, making our nerves happy. Our muscles and tendons, right, we're elongating and shortening them, again, just kind of lubricating. And then we're also giving the brain-body connection, right, that neural stimulus, teaching our body how to move through different ranges of motion so that if we end up in a funky range of motion when we're climbing or we trip over a rock or something like that, our brain and our body are used to being in that position, so it can react appropriately and reduces your risk of injury. It also just feels really nice. Like, I've never gotten off of, like, if I do yoga is kind of my modality of choice, but I've never gotten off of my yoga mat and been like, I feel so much worse. I always feel better.
That's amazing. And great breakdown. For me, I use GoWad just because it's easy for me. It's like an app and it gives you, I can click 8 minutes or whatever. And I try to do it every day. I probably get about 5 days a week of that. What would you say, you're talking about short, medium, long, what would those durations be?
Yeah, so short is going to be your like 5 to 10 minutes. You're still going to get something out of that, but it's better than nothing, but not ideal. Medium is going to be that like 30-minute session. I kind of find for endurance athletes, unless you have a specific injury that we're working with, 30 minutes is kind of that sweet spot where you're not adding a bunch of volume, but you're still able to get a good amount of mobility out of that. And then long is going to be like your hour or more than that. And that might be if someone's going through an injury specifically where it's like, okay, we just need to really like work this specific area of your body out and we just need to sit down and like do this. And every once in a while I'll throw that in like for myself where it's just like, oh, I'm towards the end of a training block. Like I really just need more time working in these motions. I might do an hour session, but I'm not doing an hour session consistently, mostly just for the sake of time and working and having a life.
So you're mostly doing 10 to 45-minute sessions?
Yeah. With that sweet spot being like 20 to 30 minutes.
Okay. And you do that 3 times a week. For me, I'm doing like 8 minutes almost every day, 5, 6 days a week. So they're pretty similar in that how much vanilla we're putting in is neat. And what I've noticed is for myself and some athletes, so that app Go, what I mentioned, just a way to do it for free. You can do kind of mobility screening that I thought is good. It's different than the FMS, and it kind of uses your phone sensors. And then it gives a breakdown of just, everything from adductor to hips to just actual kind of tangible stuff. For me, I'm in 80% or above on everything except for thoracic. My thoracic is 30%. And what's neat is it took my PT and I 5 months to kind of figure out that's what was causing the numbness in my fingers, right? So I get neuropathy. A lot of it stems from C7T1 junction. And when I do the long distance expedition races, it'll come back for about 2 months. And it's a mix of the bike and that kind of position. I'm not doing enough of the chin tucks or anything. And then, the weight pressing down on the brachial plexus, all that. And so it's like, for us, we would, do all kinds of stuff, all the flossing. That's why I've been doing flossing when you were mentioning I kind of started doing it. Like right now, I have the neuropathy back from Worlds that just happened. But the thoracic, when we target that, it just really alleviates it. So for my athletes, some of them, if they're having issues with stuff, I'll have them just do that test and we'll see if anything's way of an outlier and then target that for a bit and see if it helps. Do you have anything how do you view trouble spots with athletes? Because you're kind of specializing in athletes that have trouble spots or consistencies. What are some ways you kind of shape working with a new client or things people could introduce?
Yeah, so every athlete that works with me, whether they're injured or not, we start with a movement screen. And I don't do specifically FMS, which is just a basically patented type of movement screen. I just do my own movement screen. And so they send videos to me and then I can slow them down and watch and kind of look for different abnormalities. So I have them go through head to toe, full movement in all ranges of motion, and I have them film from all four sides. And then I'll do a quick strength screen too to see if that's also showing functionally, because sometimes you can have the body has weird ways of getting around limited motion and it may or may not be a contributor. So I'll have them do like a deep squat versus a 90-degree squat. I want to look at their lunge. I want to see if they can do a single leg get up from a chair with their knee at 90 degrees. Just certain things that I can look at and see like, okay, yeah, like we know that you have hip weakness because you can't control your knee in this specific position. Or like, yeah, I noticed on your spinal screen that you like to hinge at the low back instead of using your full spine to get your range of motion. Like, where is that showing in some of the functional movements that you would do? And then that will guide my treatment kind of forever for, okay, well, we know this person has limited thoracic mobility, so I'm going to make sure that every single mobility video that I give them has some thoracic movement in, or their external to internal hip rotation is not an ideal ratio, so we're going to work on increasing whichever one they're limited on, and then kind of just building that into their program. So a lot of times people don't even know, like I'll go over it with them and they're like, okay, yeah, but they don't even know like why I'm choosing what exercise when I could choose 300 different ways to strengthen your quads. And it's like, well, I'm picking this one because it also is going to do this and this for you because you have these deficits.
That's fantastic. You've been doing this for so long. I'm sure that a lot of it is you kind of have the routine that you've built and you've tweaked over time. And a lot of it's your eyeball just looking at it, and you can tell from looking what's going on. And you've dealt with it over that you can just know, okay, I see this. That means we need to do X, Y, Z, and it'll take a couple weeks and that kind of thing, which is very similar to teaching, let's say, Olympic lifts at university when I was there. It's a complex thing that you're looking at, but because you've done it over and over, you just know where to cue in and you can just tell different stuff, which is pretty neat. And so, Rachel, you worked with Jesse Tubb on a project for racers really around the times right before and after race day. Can you kind of talk us through what that was and what that looked like?
So that was really exciting. Jesse is a great guy. He had reached out to me when I first launched my online business and was like, "Hey, I try to work with PTs. What do you think we could do something with?" And he is a veteran and specializes on more of the kind of psychosocial side of athletics. And so I was like, I noticed in myself, and a lot of people have trouble with taper week or the 2 weeks going into a big event and recovery after not just physically kind of not knowing what to do, but then also emotionally of like, okay, I'm supposed to be decreasing volume, I'm supposed to be resting and recovering, and the biggest event of my life is looming. And my only coping mechanism is being taken away from me because I can't go out and like do a big run or do a big hike. So how do I deal with that and harness that emotion and harness that nervous energy for good instead of just letting it consume me and not actually recovering like I'm supposed to? So we developed, it's a free resource. We wanted to give it to the community. So anyone can go onto it. We can link it here. It's just a school course. And you go through for the taper week. You ideally start 2 weeks ahead of a big race, but you can start it whenever. And it's every other day. And we pair together what we're doing. So I go over different aspects of physical preparation. And then Jesse ties that to the next day would be paired with a mental preparation. So you kind of come through the 2 weeks feeling fully prepared, both physically and mentally, for your race. And then after you're done racing, we did a week long where it's the same thing kind of every other day, working on a physical aspect of recovering and then the emotional aspect of recovering, because the taper blues and the post-race blues and depression are definitely real, and I think something that's not talked about all that often, but when you bring it up to another athlete, they're like, "Oh yeah, I get so depressed after a race, I just sign up for another one," or whatever their coping mechanism might be.
I love it. And I work with Jesse very closely. So we did summer camp this summer. We had 18 kids out for an adventure racing camp where they camped out all week in Shenandoah, which was great. And then we also are race directing together a bunch of races, which I'm pumped about. And for those who don't know Jesse Tubb, he'll be on the podcast at some point talking about sport performance psychology. And he's a phenomenal resource. He's been adventure racing for well over a decade. He did Eco Challenge Fiji, and he races with Bones internationally from time to time. I mean, and more importantly than anything, he's just one of the nicest guys I think I've ever met. Well, with that said, I want to thank you for your time and for coming in and sharing your wisdom. You clearly have a plethora of experience and a lot to offer to the adventure racing community and our athletes. And so I want to thank you for sharing a lot of your knowledge with us out here.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Sounds great.